Marine bully mocks new black recruit. Unaware, he's a MCMAP master who defeats him with one punch. The humid California morning air hangs heavy over Camp Pendleton as 22-year-old Corporal Jamal Washington steps off the transport bus. His dress blue uniform crisp despite the long journey from Quantico, where he earned his Marine Combat Instructor certification in record time. Around him, seasoned Marines size up the new arrival with eyes trained to identify weakness. But none recognize the quiet confidence that comes from mastering the Marine Corps martial arts program at levels most will never achieve. Staff Sergeant Rick Tank Morrison watches from the drill field, his muscled frame and aggressive demeanor marking him as the kind of leader who mistakes intimidation for discipline, brutality for strength. For 3 years, Tank has ruled this unit through fear and casual racism disguised as military tradition, breaking down Marines who don't fit his narrow definition of warrior while building his reputation on the destruction of spirits he considers inferior. Today, his assumptions about dominance will collide with excellence that doesn't announce itself through arrogance. And a lesson will reshape everything both men understand about true strength, real leadership, and the difference between commanding respect and demanding submission through violence. Tank Morrison's morning routine begins with the ritual intimidation that has defined his leadership style since earning stripes through aggression rather than competence. His approach to building Marines, shaped by belief that breaking people down somehow makes them stronger rather than just smaller versions of themselves. He surveys the training ground like a feudal lord examining his domain. His reputation built on the systematic humiliation of Marines whose only crime was trusting that the Corps would protect them from leaders who view power as license for cruelty. His office walls display commendations earned through politics rather than genuine achievement, awards that recognize longevity rather than excellence, photos with officers who mistake his brutality for effective leadership, because results look impressive when measured by fear rather than genuine performance or unit cohesion. The Marines under Tank's command move with the careful precision of people who've learned to avoid triggering explosions, their efficiency born from terror rather than pride, their silence protecting them from attention that inevitably becomes punishment regardless of their actual performance or dedication to mission accomplishment. Private Martinez keeps his head down while polishing equipment that gleams beyond regulation standards, his perfectionism a desperate attempt to avoid becoming Tank's target for daily aggression that masquerades as training but serves mainly to feed ego that thrives on domination. Corporal Johnson maintains perfect posture while reviewing manuals he's memorized, knowing that knowledge won't protect him from humiliation, but hoping competence might minimize the cruelty that Tank dispenses with casual efficiency born from years of unchecked authority. Tank's racist tendencies operate within the gray areas where institutional oversight struggles to penetrate, his comments carefully calibrated to avoid formal complaints while maintaining psychological pressure that breaks down Marines whose only mistake was possessing different skin color or cultural background than his narrow definition of acceptable American warrior. He's perfected the art of plausible deniability, couching racial harassment in language that sounds like legitimate critique to officers who don't want to investigate too deeply, creating an environment where discrimination flourishes under cover of military discipline that protects him from consequences while leaving his victims without recourse through official channels that prefer maintaining unit cohesion over addressing uncomfortable truths about systemic racism. The arrival of new Marines provides Tank with fresh opportunities to demonstrate power through systematic degradation, each introduction becoming performance designed to establish dominance, while entertaining Marines who've learned to laugh along rather than become targets themselves. His approach follows predictable patterns: identify perceived weakness, exploit it publicly, then rationalize cruelty as necessary training that builds character rather than just satisfying sadistic impulses that military structure enables rather than constrains. The process serves multiple purposes: reinforcing his authority, intimidating witnesses, and creating atmosphere where challenging his behavior becomes unthinkable because potential costs outweigh any benefits that speaking truth might provide to victims who learn silence protects survival better than justice protects principles. As Jamal approaches the unit area with gear that suggests competence rather than inexperience, Tank's predatory instincts activate with anticipation that new prey will provide entertainment while reinforcing lessons about hierarchy that he spent years teaching through fear rather than example. The young Marine's confident bearing triggers something primal in Tank's understanding of dominance. Here walks someone who hasn't learned proper submission, whose posture suggests self-respect that needs crushing before it spreads to other Marines who might mistake dignity for acceptable behavior under Tank's command. The morning routine that usually flows with predictable efficiency suddenly gains focus as Tank prepares to demonstrate power through ritual humiliation designed to break spirits, while building his reputation as leader who maintains discipline through methods that blur lines between training and abuse. Tank's approach toward Jamal carries theatrical precision designed to maximize audience impact while minimizing official oversight. His movements calculated to create spectacle that reinforces authority through public demonstration of power over someone whose crime consists entirely of existing outside Tank's comfort zone. The other Marines sense approaching storm, their experience teaching them to recognize patterns that precede explosions, their body language shifting into protective positions that experience has shown provide best chances for avoiding collateral damage when Tank's cruelty seeks targets among witnesses who might accidentally draw attention through inappropriate reactions to injustice unfolding before their eyes. Well, what do we have here? Tank announces, his voice carrying across the training area with authority that commands attention while broadcasting intentions that make observers complicit through witnessing rather than intervening when institutional power protects perpetrator more effectively than victims. Fresh meat from Quantico. Let me guess, diversity recruitment program? Affirmative action warrior. His words slice through morning air with casual racism disguised as military humor, each syllable calculated to establish dominance, while testing boundaries that determine how much cruelty the environment will tolerate before someone finds courage to challenge behavior that institution tacitly enables through strategic blindness. Jamal's response demonstrates discipline that advanced training has burned into reflexes, his bearing remaining respectful, while eyes communicate understanding that recognition brings danger in environments where competence threatens insecure leadership more than incompetence threatens mission effectiveness. Staff Sergeant Corporal Washington reporting for duty, Marine Corps Combat Instructor Certified. His introduction carries information that should command respect from professional military leader. But Tank's worldview can't process excellence that challenges assumptions about who deserves recognition when achievement threatens hierarchies built on prejudice rather than merit, fear rather than genuine authority earned through competence and character. Tank's laughter echoes across the training ground with cruel satisfaction that feeds on audience whose silence enables continuation of behavior that transforms military training environment into theater for personal pathology disguised as leadership development. Combat instructor? At your age? Someone clearly made paperwork mistakes, boy. Real Marines earn their credentials through blood and time, not diversity programs and social justice nonsense. His dismissal reveals ignorance about actual achievement, while demonstrating reflex to diminish accomplishments that threaten comfortable assumptions about who deserves success when merit conflicts with prejudice about capability and worth. The challenge escalates as Tank moves closer, his physical presence designed to intimidate, while verbal assault continues with precision that years of practice have refined into weapon systems that destroy confidence without leaving marks that medical examination could document or official investigation could prosecute. You know what, combat instructor? Why don't you show us some of those fancy moves they taught you in diversity school? Let's see if social justice training translates into real warrior skills. His proposal carries multiple layers of threat. Physical confrontation disguised as training opportunity, racial humiliation dressed as professional evaluation, power demonstration masked as legitimate military exercise. Jamal recognizes the trap being set with clarity that advanced tactical training provides when facing enemies whose strategies rely on confusion rather than direct confrontation. psychological manipulation rather than honest engagement with reality that their positions can't survive when examined objectively. The situation demands response that protects both immediate safety and long-term career while maintaining dignity. That Tank's approach is specifically designed to destroy through systematic degradation that transforms military environment in a playground for sadistic impulses that institutional structure protects rather than constrains, when oversight focuses on maintaining unit cohesion over addressing uncomfortable truths about leadership failure disguised as traditional discipline. The training area falls silent as Tank's challenge hangs in the humid air like suspended explosion, every Marine present understanding that they're witnessing more than routine harassment. This represents test of principles that will define unit culture for months or years, depending on outcome, that could either reinforce Tank's reign of terror or demonstrate that competence eventually confronts cruelty when courage finds opportunity to reveal truth about real strength versus performed dominance. Jamal steps forward with movements that suggest calculation rather than emotion, his tactical training enabling assessment of situation that considers multiple variables simultaneously while maintaining composure that years of advanced instruction have refined into automatic responses under pressure. Staff Sergeant, I'd be happy to demonstrate Marine Corps martial arts techniques, but I should mention that I hold Gray Belt Instructor certification with Combat Application Specialty. Jamal states with professional courtesy that carries undertones of warning for anyone educated enough to understand what his credentials actually represent in terms of capability and training intensity that most Marines never experience beyond basic introduction to fighting systems that instructors like him teach to special operations units. His words create moment of uncertainty in Tank's confidence as information penetrates awareness that perhaps this situation contains variables that his typical approach hasn't accounted for when selecting targets based on assumptions rather than actual knowledge about capabilities that quiet competence might conceal. Tank's response reveals commitment to course of action that pride won't allow him to abandon despite growing sense that his usual tactics might prove insufficient against opponent whose calm demeanor suggests experience with violence that transcends typical military training environments, where Tank's aggression usually dominates through intimidation rather than actual fighting skill that serious combat demands when theoretical knowledge meets practical application under pressure that reveals differences between performed toughness and genuine capability earned through dedication that Tank's approach to leadership has never required or developed. Gray Belt? Instructor? Tank laughs, but uncertainty creeps into his voice as audience recognizes shift in dynamics that experience teaches them to identify when predator-prey relationships begin showing signs of reversal that could transform familiar power structures into dangerous territory where assumptions about dominance might prove inadequate against reality, that competence eventually confronts cruelty through direct demonstration of capability, rather than just enduring abuse that seems unstoppable until someone with sufficient skill decide tolerance has reached limits that principle demands crossing. The physical confrontation begins when Tank throws wild punch that telegraphs intent while revealing fundamental lack of technical training in fighting systems that Jamal has mastered through years of intensive instruction under combat veterans who understand difference between sport fighting and life or death encounters, where technique matters more than size, precision matters more than aggression. Training matters more than intimidation when violence becomes unavoidable tool for defending. Principles that some situations demand protecting through direct action rather than just hoping institutional solutions will eventually address injustices that immediate circumstances require confronting through personal courage. Jamal's response demonstrates years of training condensed into a single moment of perfect execution as Tank's telegraphed assault meets counter technique that gray belt proficiency enables when facing untrained opponent whose aggression becomes vulnerability rather than advantage, when fighting someone whose understanding of combat transcends amateur brawling that Tank's approach represents. The confrontation ends almost before beginning as Jamal's precise application of Marine Corps martial arts principles redirects Tank's momentum in a takedown that deposits the staff sergeant on a training ground dirt with impact that ego suffers more than body. Humiliation cuts deeper than physical pain. Recognition of incompetence burns worse than momentary discomfort that proper technique inflicts without causing permanent damage that would complicate aftermath. The silence that follows Tank's humiliating defeat stretches across the training ground like aftermath of explosion. Every witness processing implications of witnessing systematic reversal of power dynamics that seemed permanent until competence demonstrated superiority over intimidation through brief but decisive encounter that revealed truth about real capability versus performed dominance. Tank lies in dirt that symbolizes collapse of authority built on foundation of fear rather than respect. His position reflecting internal reality that external circumstances have suddenly exposed through direct confrontation with excellence that his worldview couldn't acknowledge until forced demonstration made denial impossible even for ego that thrives on self-deception. The Marines who've endured Tank's abuse watch with expressions that cycle through amazement, relief, and growing recognition that perhaps endurance wasn't their only option when facing leadership that mistakes cruelty for strength. That maybe competence can challenge corruption when courage finds opportunity to demonstrate alternatives to submission that institutional structure typically demands from people whose only protection comes from invisibility rather than justice. That principle requires defending through direct action when circumstances make tolerance complicit with oppression rather than wise strategy for survival in hostile environments. Jamal extends hand to help Tank to his feet, his gesture demonstrating character that victory reveals rather than corrupts, his offer of assistance showing strength that includes mercy rather than excludes humanity when power shifts create opportunities for revenge that wisdom recognizes as chances to demonstrate different approaches to leadership than domination through fear that Tank's methods represent. Staff Sergeant, you threw a good punch. Maybe we could work on technique together sometime. He offers, his words carrying dignity that transforms potential humiliation in a possible redemption if pride can overcome injury sufficiently to accept help from someone whose competence no longer allows dismissal through prejudice that reality has exposed as willful blindness. Tank's response will determine whether this moment becomes catalyst for growth or just temporary setback in career built on systematic abuse disguised as military tradition. Whether recognition of superior skill opens mind to different understanding of strength and leadership or simply hardens resistance to change that threatens comfortable assumptions about dominance and worth that his identity depends on maintaining despite evidence that alternatives exist to approaches that have defined his understanding of power and authority throughout career that competence has suddenly challenged through demonstration that couldn't be ignored, dismissed, or rationalized away through familiar mental gymnastics. The incident transforms unit dynamics in ways that extend far beyond immediate participants as other Marines begin recognizing that Tank's authority depended on illusion of invincibility that single moment of truth has permanently shattered. That fear can be replaced by respect when leadership demonstrates competence rather than just demanding submission through threats that lose power when confronted by someone whose capabilities exceed assumptions that prejudice creates about worth and ability. The psychological shift creates space for different relationships between authority and subordination, between leadership and followership, between military discipline and human dignity that Tank's approach had systematically destroyed through methods that confuse dominance with effectiveness. Word of Tank's defeat spreads through informal networks that connect units across base, his reputation for invincibility becoming legend of hubris that competence conquered when arrogance met expertise in confrontation that revealed truth about real strength versus performed dominance. Actual capability versus intimidation tactics that lose effectiveness when facing someone whose training transcends typical military preparation that Tank had assumed represented upper limits of skill that any Marine could achieve regardless of dedication, intelligence, or access to advanced instruction that gray belt certification requires through demonstration of competence that few Marines ever develop despite institutional opportunities that most never pursue, with intensity that mastery demands from people whose commitment exceeds average expectations about excellence and achievement. 6 months later, the training ground that witnessed Tank's humiliation has been transformed into an environment where actual military excellence flourishes under leadership that prioritizes competence over intimidation, where Marines develop skills through instruction rather than endure abuse disguised as training, where diversity of background becomes strength rather than target for systematic harassment that Tank's approach had institutionalized through methods that confused fear with respect. When measuring effectiveness of military leadership and unit cohesion, Jamal's promotion to training instructor reflects recognition that his capabilities extend far beyond single moment of physical dominance and a systematic understanding of how to develop other Marines through positive reinforcement rather than destructive criticism. Tank's transformation from predator to student represents personal journey from leadership through fear toward understanding that strength includes rather than excludes humanity, that competence demonstrates rather than demands respect, that authority serves rather than dominates when properly understood as responsibility for developing others rather than opportunity for satisfying personal pathology through systematic abuse of people whose only mistake was trusting that military institution would protect them from leaders whose approach to power transforms service into suffering rather than growth into excellence through positive example and constructive instruction. The Marine Corps martial arts program that Jamal teaches emphasizes principles that extend beyond physical technique into philosophical understanding of warrior ethos that includes protection of innocent rather than just destruction of enemies, service to others rather than just advancement of self, leadership through example rather than just command through fear when developing Marines whose character must match their physical capabilities if military service is to serve values that American society expects from people who are uniform representing national ideals rather than just personal ambitions for power and authority. Unit performance improves dramatically under leadership that recognizes excellence regardless of its packaging, that develops talent wherever it exists rather than just celebrating familiar forms of achievement, that comfort zones validate when measuring military effectiveness through results rather than just compliance with traditional approaches, that Tank's methods represented when measuring success through fear rather than genuine accomplishment, that mission requirements demand from Marines whose capabilities must exceed basic training if they're to serve effectively in complex environments that modern military operations require. Tank's journey from racist bully to genuine leader illustrates possibility for personal growth when confrontation with reality forces recognition that assumptions about worth and capability often reflect prejudice rather than accurate assessment of human potential that exists across all backgrounds when opportunity meets preparation in environments that support development rather than just demanding conformity to narrow definitions of acceptable behavior and acceptable people. His transformation becomes example that change is possible when pride can overcome injury sufficiently to accept instruction from someone whose competence no longer allows dismissal through comfortable prejudices. The gray belt instructor whose quiet competence conquered casual cruelty through single moment of applied excellence now serves as example that strength doesn't announce itself through aggression, that capability doesn't require demonstration through dominance, that leadership serves rather than dominates when properly understood as responsibility for developing others rather than opportunity for satisfying personal needs for power and recognition that Tank's approach had confused with. Effective military leadership that actually serves mission accomplishment and troop welfare rather than just ego satisfaction disguised as traditional discipline. As Jamal leads training sessions where Marines learn both physical techniques and philosophical principles that make warriors rather than just fighters, he remembers the moment when Tank's prejudice met his competence in confrontation that revealed truth about real strength versus performed dominance. Actual capability versus intimidation tactics that lose effectiveness when facing someone whose training transcends assumptions about limits that dedication can overcome when commitment meets. Opportunity in environments that support excellence rather than just demanding conformity to familiar approaches that comfort validates, but effectiveness often requires transcending when mission demands breakthrough performance from breakthrough people whose capabilities exceed average expectations about human potential and achievement. The Marine who defeated bully with single punch has become teacher whose lessons extend far beyond fighting techniques into understanding that true warriors protect rather than prey upon others, that genuine strength includes rather than excludes humanity, that real leadership develops rather than dominates when power serves principle rather than just personal satisfaction, that Tank's approach had confused with military effectiveness. Their story proves that competence eventually confronts cruelty when courage finds opportunity to demonstrate alternatives to approaches that mistake fear for respect, dominance for strength, prejudice for principle when measuring worth and capability in environments that either support or suppress human potential based on leadership, that either recognizes or ignores excellence wherever it appears regardless of packaging that might challenge comfortable assumptions about who deserves opportunities to serve and succeed. If this story moved you, maybe it's time to recognize that true strength protects rather than dominates, that real leadership develops rather than destroys, that genuine warriors serve others rather than just serving themselves when power creates opportunities to either build or break the people whose potential depends on recognition rather than prejudice determining who gets chances to prove their worth. If it is, choose strength over dominance, competence over cruelty, justice over just maintaining comfortable assumptions about who deserves respect when measuring human worth and capability.